Good morning, everybody. I am Jake and Hodson, your host for today, and we are going to be talking about the failures of the Biden Harris administration. So I'm sure this is something that's on everybody's minds, right? We're already seeing it in the midterm election polls. 35 35 House seats are projected to flip Republican in this election. And Republicans are also projected to obtain a plurality in the Senate. And we're already seeing that slowly starting to happen, right? For example, in the Arizona Senate poll, Blake Masters has completely alleviated the gargantuan lead that incumbent Mark Kelly held over him. All right, just a couple months ago, Mark Kelly held a 8-point lead over Blake Masters. Now, after post debate, that lead has been expunged to only 4%, meaning that Blake Masters is rapidly obtaining the momentum he needs to unseat incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly. We're also seeing that progress in Georgia. All right. Incumbent Senator and Reverend Warnock is actually down by a minuscule amount of points to Republican candidate Brian Walker. I believe it's 49 to 47%. And and once again, I hate to sound repetitious here, but in Pennsylvania, we're also seeing uh, John Fetterman, the incumbent lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. We're already seeing his progress rapidly being turned around in favor of Dr. Mohammed Oz. Uh, Much congruent to the Arizona Senate poll, just a few months prior, John Fetterman was polling 8 points above Dr. Mohammed Oz. And now we are this close to having the first Muslim senator in the U.S. Senate. And I believe that this is all correlated to the Biden administration and all of its failures. I mean, heck, even in Democratic strongholds like Oregon and in Washington, all right, gargantuan seats are up for re-election this cycle, like the Oregon gubernatorial seat and the Oregon senatorial seat. And Republicans are doing surprisingly well in these polls. Uh, like the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Drasna, is 4 points above her adversary, Tina Kotek, the Speaker of the Oregon House. And we're also seeing the same thing in Washington. All right, Tiffany Smiley is only 3 points below her adversary, Patty Murray, right? And there are a gargantuan amount of factors pushing this. And I'm going to correspond about all of those factors here today. The main reasons I believe why this is happening is is a recession, because despite what the Biden administration has said, a recession is by definition 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And we have definitely seen that. Next, I also believe that crime is a major factor here. All right, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris have been too progressive on crime. In fact, just this week they issued a pardon for marijuana users, despite the fact that it's been shown that 40% of marijuana victims relapse into hard drugs like cocaine, meth, and heck, even intravenous drugs. And I believe that the American constituents have had enough of this. Next, foreign policy is a big pusher. A lot of people don't believe that we're doing enough for Ukraine, and I couldn't agree more. All right. Russia has officially annexed 15% of Ukraine. That's Ukrainian territory. And they're just alleviating the sovereignty of Ukraine without being really permitted to. And also the failure in Afghanistan. A lot of people were against the Afghanistan war, and a lot of people wanted to bring the troops home. I was not included in that population, but it was the vast plurality of people. And so Joe Biden tried to bring the troops home, but he failed at that too. On August 26th, 13 Marines perished in Afghanistan due to a terrorist attack. But Biden has yet to correspond anything about that. I would be surprised if the American constituent even knows it. All right? We have to stop. And the people are really showing that they want change. And so in this podcast, we're going to go in depth on why people want this change and what we can do to change. Thank you for viewing. This has been Jake and Hodson. And we will first talk about the monetary quagmire or problem that is plaguing our country. Okay, so I've come up with a theorem. It's called the economic trifecta. Okay, so this trifecta consists of unemployment, high taxes, and finally the inflationary crisis. So first, I'm going to talk about the taxes. All right, uh, throughout my career, I've always been an advocate for the flat income tax. Okay, that's always been a part of my rhetoric. Well, Joe Biden, I mean, even those who are not an advocate for the flat income tax at least realize that Biden is going a bit overboard with his tax and spend regime. Okay? In 2020, he said that in all of his economic reforms, that the middle and low class would not suffer. Only the upper class and the rich guy, the top 2% would. All right? Well, let me ask you something. Haven't your taxes been a little bit higher than they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago? I mean, it was just a couple of months ago. He spent $500 billion in the most expensive executive order ever in U.S. history for student loan forgiveness. I mean, there's a lot of problems with this. For starters, it takes private adversaries out of education. Okay. So, I mean, this has been made clear. Colleges need tuition money. Okay. They need money from people. And the students need education. Right? And so there's a mutual relationship there. But the Biden administration has begun to put a federal foothold into education. And I believe this is going to be catastrophic for not only possible tuition cost, but taxing people who don't want to go to college or don't have a career that involves college at all. I mean, this is just practically a tax on the blue collar worker. This is wrong. In addition, it makes the bachelor's degree or the master's degree or the PhD more worthless. All right. So if anyone, irregardless of economic situation, can attend schooling, then that will make the degree less valuable. Will it not? I mean, it doesn't make more people educated. It just means that more people are educated, so we don't look for a certain qualification in this. All right. Now, sure, there's a big problem in education, but pumping more federal money into it is never the answer. Uh, in addition, I mean, look at Medicare and Medicaid, or typically referred to as Obamacare. All right. I've throughout my career, I've always been an adversary of Obamacare. In like ever since 2018, because I knew what the effects that Obamacare had. So even in 2008, when then incumbent Bush was beginning to leave office, and an economic recession had bloomed. All right, still 70% of Americans were privately insured. Well, Obama came in and passed and scripted the Affordable Care Act, signed the Affordable Care Act, and that number rapidly declined from 70% to 20. And I mean, under the Trump administration in 2017 and 2018, private insurers began to rise up. It's just and now once again, the people who are privately insured is at an all-time low. All right. Uh, Now, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that the privately insured rate is dropping below 20%. I mean, this is just wrong. You are being exploited. Your family is being exploited. And the American worker is being exploited. And not to mention welfare. All right. Do you know that welfare benefits? And I'm sure not a lot of people know this because a lot of Democratic leaders fail to mention it whenever they're advocating for welfare. But the welfare limits are 99 weeks. Okay. So that is 23 months or almost 2 years. Do you think it takes the average American 2 years to find employment? I don't think so. No. And I think it's wrong that the American people have to pay for have to pay other people's salaries. All right, that's not fair. They already have enough to spend their money on. They already have enough economic hard times. So why should we exacerbate that problem by making them pay for other people? And I mean, I've mentioned this a lot, but I mean, while sure, socialized healthcare, uh, a guaranteed minimum salary, and I mean, all of these other programs, they sound great in theory, but someone has to pick up the tab. And I think the American people are beginning to realize that they are picking up the tab. That it's not a socialistic society where the federal government pays for everything, but rather rather the federal government spends as much as they really want to, and more than they can really, and eventually you have to pay for it. All right. So even if they're programs that only the top 2% needs, which is definitely ironic considering how much the Democratic Party talks about the top 1 or 5%. But yeah, if you pay for something that only the bottom 2% needs, then I mean, once again, you're going to have to pay for it. And eventually, I mean, nobody's going to be incentivized to work because someone else can pick up the tab, right? They've had enough. They want that minimum. They want that guaranteed minimum income, and they don't want to work for it. And I mean, then the federal government has to begin picking up the tab, and so the deficit gets higher and higher and higher. And I mean, I know this sounds dystopian, but it really does, and it has happened. All right, just take a look at the Obama administration. All right, prior to Obama taking office, the deficit was $8 trillion. That was how much debt we had. After Obama left office, the deficit was now at $17 trillion. All right, and I mean, Trump did his best to mitigate the situation, and I know like a lot of pundits of Trump are going to say that he didn't do a lot for deficit reduction. And I mean, yes, while that may be true, he didn't exacerbate the deficit like like this administration has. In fact, Biden has been claiming that the deficit is getting lower, that he's doing a lot for deficit reduction. And I think, and I personally laughed whenever I heard that because of how crazy it is. All right, just take a look at the deficit now. All right, after Trump left office, it was it was $15 trillion. Now it is $33 trillion because Obama is taxing more. Biden is taxing more, and he's spending more, and he's spending more than he's taxing. And much congruent to other Democratic candidates, he has failed to deliver on his promise to not hurt the middle class because there are only so many millionaires in the United States that you can steal from. But after that, it gets pretty hard scrabble to find the money you need. So yeah, you, the middle class family, and the low class family are going to are being taxed more and more for something the Obama administration wants to do. I believe that is wrong. and so profoundly appalling. But it's not the only piece of the economic trifecta. We also have to consider the unemployment rate. So, the Biden administration has claimed again and again that the unemployment rate is 4%. I mean, once again, I think everyone knows that this is false, right? Unless you are a hardcore, unless you're a part of the 20% of the, unless you're part of the 38% that approves of Biden, I think you know that that is wrong. All right? Because it is not sound economics to increase taxes on the upper class and on big corporations. They are job providers, right? So I think everyone knows just right off the bat that since he's doing that, employment rate is naturally going to lower. Next, we have to consider that what does he consider an employed person? Well, his welfare benefits, people drawing welfare benefits, it's entirely possible that he counts those people as employed, or it's entirely possible that he counts people who were recently laid off as employed. I mean, there's just a lot of loopholes with this poll, and not to mention that a 4% unemployment rate is really not stellar. I mean, really, despite what he says that it's one of the lowest unemployment rates in history, a 4% unemployment rate is not something to uh, really talk about. I mean, that's 1 in 20. A 4% unemployment rate, that's 1 in 20 people. All right, that is too much. And I mean, once again, I've mentioned this prior, but if you had all the tools and all the loopholes that the Biden administration has, then why wouldn't the unemployment rate be 4%? In fact, with all these benefits that he's mentioning, with all these benefits that I'm mentioning, it would surprise me if it was anything higher than 4%. I mean, the 4% unemployment rate is wrong, and I think everyone in America knows it's wrong. Next, let's talk about the final piece of the trifecta, the inflationary crisis. So, the inflationary crisis, I believe everyone has noticed, all right? The Biden administration has even noticed it, and they're attempting to fix the crisis by raising interest rates, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, I think everyone's noticed the inflation problem. In fact, in a famous ad by Dr. Mehmet Oz, uh, he talked about making crudité and how expensive these goods were. I mean, of course, he was belittled uh, by political opponents, I will concede. Even John Fetterman himself talked a lot about it in his infamous veggie tray ad, quote unquote. But yeah, everyone has noticed that not only are gas prices higher, but the price of milk and eggs, they're also much higher. Right? So you could just go buy food for the week and congratulations, you spent $230 on just your food for the week. And I mean, I think the Republicans have definitely done a good job at hammering the Democrats where they're vulnerable on this issue. And I actually believe that they were talking way too much about the inflationary crisis and not about other issues, and that's the reason why some of their progress was beginning to be turned around. But I mean, yeah, they've definitely nailed it on the inflation issue. Because everyone in America probably knows that inflation is bad. And everyone knows that the Biden administration is not doing enough to stop it. Or he's trying to do too much at a time, and that's making the problem worse. So, yeah, all of this makes a bad economy. And a bad economy has been a winning issue for Republicans in the past. I mean, just look at 1980, 1984, 1988, 1996, 2000, uh, 2012, 2016, and even in 2020 with Trump rapidly fixing the economy after the COVID crisis. But yeah, I believe that this is definitely one of the reasons why the quote unquote blue wave is being rapidly reversed, which it wasn't a blue wave to begin with, but we I mean, this is definitely a reason why people are pivoting from Democrat to Republican. But this is just one of the many issues. Next, we're going to talk about foreign policy and the Russo-Ukraine War and the American-Afghanistan War, which had recently came to a close in late 2021. So, over the past 2 years, the Biden-Harris administration has had a series of foreign policy failures. The first of which I'll mention is the American-Afghanistan War. So the war had been going on for 20 years, right? Ever since former incumbent President Bush declared war on Afghanistan. Well, actually didn't declare war, but deployed troops to Afghanistan in 2001. And over time, people rapidly began to adversary the war, right? They believed that the war was profoundly pointless, and they were no longer profound advocates for it like they were at the very beginning. And so, and I mean, once again, this is a bad belief to have because this war was about penalizing the radical Islamic terror that had caused, the 9/11 attacks, and really enlightening multi-federal governments that vigorous acts of aggression congruent to this would be penalized, and vigorously so. And it was also entirely possible that the authoritarian regime that plagued Afghanistan for years and years to come would finally be replaced with a democratic and voting populace. And it's entirely possible that that the Afghan government would abstain from being a safe haven for not only members of the Taliban but members of other terrorist organizations. But despite these protests, Biden did say that he was going to vacate Afghanistan. He also made that promise whenever he was running for vice president in 2012. But that is besides the point. So he attempts to launch the vacation of Afghanistan. He's going to liberate Afghanistan from American troops. Well, he botched it. I think everyone was enlightened of that. On August 26th, a terrorist attack was committed on American Marines, and 13 of them perished in 13 of them perished. But yet this terrorist act was neglected by the Biden administration, and it was neglected by Democratic senators, governors, and congressmen. It was just simply swept under the rug and neglected. But this was not the only hideous problem that plagued the vacation of Afghanistan. You also had the objective fact that thousands and thousands of residents of Afghanistan, who were unvetted, by the way, managed to get inside of the country, right? And this is possibly the reason why crime rates have been exacerbated, but we're going to correspond a little bit more about that later. But the point is that even something that was primarily popular with the majority of Americans rapidly becomes unpopular because of the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris simply botched it. Yeah, and I found this situation absolutely appalling. And for just 8 months in, I was already despondent towards the Biden administration. In addition, the Afghan army practically had control over the Taliban had almost complete control over the vacation of Afghanistan. So Joe Biden made an announcement, right, and he said that he wanted all troops out by September 30th. Well, it wasn't him that wanted that. It was the Afghan army. Essentially, they insinuated that if troops hadn't vacated Afghanistan by September 30th, they were going to be slaughtered in terrorist actions all across the nation. And this completely made made the United States a mockery. Everyone made a mockery of the United States after this because we could have accomplished something that no other nation prior to us has accomplished, whether that be the USSR, the United Kingdom, or other former superpowers have accomplished. But we completely failed the task and were completely made a mockery of and worldwide. But this isn't the only foreign policy failure. You also have Kamala Harris's big failure, the Russo-Ukraine War. So the Russo-Ukraine War, practically, the major conduct of it practically began in uh, January of 2022. That is practically when this began. And essentially, what did the Biden administration do in response of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Well, they did nothing. They conducted nothing. What they did conduct was monetary sanctions on all imported goods to Russia, which actually did nothing to Russia because our own NATO and EU allies didn't abide by them. But some actually argue that because Russia was forced to take on protectionist measures, that Russian manufacturing was supported, and also employment in Russia grew rapidly. So yeah, um, instead of alleviating the validity of this well, not terrorist, but alleviating the validity of this illegal act, he proceeded to not only politicize it, but he proceeded to do nothing, right? And once again, these sanctions might work on nations that aren't economically stable, like let's say the DPRK or Republic of China. Like these nations that are not economically stable. But conducting monetary sanctions like these on stable nations already, it's absolutely ludicrous. And this also started another problem because as you're almost already enlightened of, domestic oil production is at an all-time low because of Joe Biden's environmental policies, which by the way are so unpopular that his Green New Deal was vetoed by 3 Democratic senators. Right, the bill didn't pass in the Senate because 3 Democrats adversaried it, including some of the most progressive senators in the U.S. Senate. But that's a different story for a different day. So yeah, these monetary sanctions actually hurt the U.S. economy more than it did the Russian economy, I would argue. I mean, I think public consensus agrees with me here that we should hold Russia accountable, and we should have held Russia accountable from the very beginning. All right, 15% of Ukraine has been completely annexed by the Russian army, and winter and the cold season is coming, and so it's entirely possible that the Russian army will be able to make more momentum and move much more rapidly now that the winter months are upon us. And the unprepared Ukrainians will be succumb to further invasions. point is that American power can stop this. But under the Biden administration and under a Democratic deadlocked Congress, it will not happen. But once again, this isn't the only problem that plagues U.S. constituents today. You also have to consider uh, other issues that are actually pushing midterm elections, I believe. Crime. So let's correspond about crime. All right. So the Biden-Harris administration has been historically had a kumbaya approach to crime, right? And Democrats in the past have historically opposed uh, the Kurt Bayer theorem of law enforcement and penalizing people who deserve to be in detainment, and instead promoting rehabilitation or not really penalizing detainees as much as they should. Uh, yeah. So, and not only this, but marijuana users just last week were liberated underneath a pardon administered by incumbent President Joe Biden. Uh, and keep in mind, these simple marijuana users oftentimes were more serious drug users and just had the incumbent district attorneys or incumbent prosecuting attorneys presiding over the case and just liberated them with a minuscule amount of time. It was a plea deal for the vast plurality of these cases. And not only this, but marijuana is a adverse drug that not only stunts cognitive thinking in juveniles, but it also alleviates the validity of productivity and lowers employment rapidly, with it actually becoming much more potent in recent years. I mean, that's just objectively true. It's becoming more potent and actually uh, laced with fentanyl in some shocking cases, which makes marijuana, as is tacit, more addictive. Despite this, however, they're being liberated due to this pardon. And I believe that American constituents have definitely had enough of this. I mean, it's crazy. But this isn't the only crime that they're going soft on. Uh, a major talking point in this election is border security. All right, 900,000 undocumented Americans, or at least that's what the Biden administration calls them, were here without being vetted. All right, so these are immigrants primarily from Mexico and possibly even South American countries like Venezuela, Colombia, and possibly Brazil and Argentina. But yeah, and not only this, but these 900,000 are primarily detainees from other different countries. I mean, this is absolutely crazy, and I believe this is part of the reason why crime rates are rapidly going up. It's because of these kumbaya approaches to borders. And I mean, once again, this is a position that other Democratic senators are calling radical, what the Biden administration has been conducting. Like Senator Mark Kelly, who's one of the more progressive members of the Senate, actually believes that the Biden administration is radical because of this approach to borders. And then we also have to consider that a lot of residents of Afghanistan have been, once again, have been coming here rapidly without being vetted first. I mean, this is absolutely shocking. And as I mentioned prior, I believe that the Kurt Bayer theorem of law enforcement really works here. Uh, I think rehabilitation can be obtained by penalization. So holding people accountable for what they've done, and using law and using capital punishment uh, more densely. I mean, the vast majority, and I would even say plurality of people, do support capital punishment. And the Biden administration has been publicly against it, and they're trying to get gubernatorial leaders all throughout the country to expunge the capital punishment, the capital penalization system. And I mean, once again, we're even seeing, and we're primarily seeing the crime rates in Washington and in Oregon because of the liberal type of law enforcement there. And this is definitely a push factor for Republicans, and I believe that this is a winning issue for Republicans. And this has been highlighted by a lot of senators or people running for Senate, like Ron Johnson, Mehmet Oz again, and even Blake Masters. He's talking a lot about this, and it's definitely a good hammering point for uh, Republicans. But I mean, yeah, once again, I believe that penalization in prison should also act as a deterrent because that's what it is. People will no longer be incentivized to conduct crimes if they know that they're going to be penalized harder for doing them. Like let's say marijuana possession or drug trafficking. All right, people are no longer incentivized to do any of those things. You know, if they're going to get detained for a longer period of time and have conditions that are less favorable. But I mean, I definitely believe that the increase in crime rates is a big failure in the Biden Harris administration. And I mean, once again, this is something that should have been anticipated uh, by constituents in the 2020 election. All right, chaos that Democrats started is now being rapidly exacerbated, and it is affecting the people nationwide. And this is definitely part of the reason why Dresna is ahead in the Oregon gubernatorial poll, and I believe that she will maintain a lead and possibly win in Oregon and defy all expectations. And I mean, once again, we've already talked about three major issues that have plagued this administration, but I believe that there are more to talk about. Uh, like, let's say the Dobbs versus Jackson case. All right, a lot of Democrats have said this is the reason why this election cycle 2022 would be a quote blue wave year. All right, everyone knows that this isn't a blue wave year, and I think a lot of constituents are upset with some of the positions that Democratic senatorial and gubernatorial candidates have taken, like Katie Hobbs, for example. Katie Hobbs, in an interview recently, said that, quote, the federal and state governments should stay out of people's lives, unquote. So, and this position was also taken by Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, just saying it's the mother's decision. That's that's always been the rhetoric. That's been the rhetoric of the 21st century used by Democrats, and I believe that the uh, American people are appalled by this, and rightfully so, because a lot of these people are advocating for partial birth abortion or late trimester abortion. And Republicans have actually been unrightfully moderating on this issue, stating uh, it was the Dobbs versus Jackson decision was the right one, the federal government should have no place in abortion. All right, so I mean, once again, this is something that the Democrats are proud of. They're proud of their stance on abortion, and they think it's a winning issue for them. When in all actuality, the vast plurality of people oppose late trimester abortion, and the vast majority of people also oppose abortion after 15 weeks, which is the policy used by a lot of contradictory states. And in fact, in the senatorial debate on Thursday of last week, Mark Kelly talked extensively, saying, "Oh yeah, it's the mother's right to choose, and the Republicans are too radical by trying to ban abortion and even punish the doctors." Like, yeah, of course they're penalize the doctors. Once again, they're not really going to be incentivized to conduct an abortion if they know that their medical license uh, and or their freedom is going to be violated if they do conduct an abortion. And the fact that the Democrats are even trying to make this a talking point is absolutely appalling to me. And to be completely honest, I think in the midterm elections, this stance that Democrats are taking is going to backfire. I really do believe that. This has been Jake and Hodson with our weekly podcast. We really appreciate you tuning in this session, and we hope to see more of you next week. Thank you, and have a great night.